Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first day of evidential hearings in this part of Tranche 2 of the inquiry's investigation. I have some things to say at the start. Those who attend these hearings frequently will hear me say it again and again. I have to say it at the beginning of each major session of evidence. Anyone in this room may use any mobile electronic device which they have to transmit silently to the outside world what they have heard in the inquiry, but only 10 minutes after the event being described. The purpose is to coincide with the video stream via YouTube, which is subject to a 10-minute delay. You may not use such a device for recording the proceedings or for taking photographs. As those of you who are here today entered the hearing venue, you were required to agree to an order restricting onward transmission or communication of information set out in an annex which you were shown on entry to the hearing room. This information will not be published in the hearing transcript and will not be transmitted via the YouTube stream. Counsel to the inquiry will direct the witness not to refer to it in their live evidence, but if they inadvertently do so, then we will need to pause proceedings. If you're uncertain how to comply with this order or have any concerns about the terms of the order or the content of the annex, please speak to Shawana Williams, who is at the back of the inquiry and raising her hand, and she will explain to you what is involved. We're going to begin by summaries of written evidence where the witness is not going to be called. And I think it's Mr. Saville who will begin with reading the first summary. Yes. Thank you.
Sir, HN20 served on the SDS between February 1978 and October 1982. He was deployed primarily into the London Workers' Group and also reported on the Persons Unknown campaign and the Revolutionary Prisoners Group. A restriction order exists over HN20's identity, but during his deployment, he adopted the name Tony Williams. HN20 provided a witness statement to the inquiry dated 16th of January 2020, which will be published and can be summarised as follows. HN20 records that in making his statement, he had difficulty in recalling the details of conversations and identities of colleagues from 40 years ago. His recollection and the attribution of individual reports is discussed in detail throughout his witness statement. HN20 joined the Metropolitan Police in the mid-1960s as a cadet and joined Special Branch in the late 1960s before being promoted to Detective Sergeant in the middle of the next decade. Prior to the SDS, he spent some time deployed in C Squad. His recruitment into the SDS happened following an in-depth discussion with two managers. He does not think that his wife or family was spoken to about any potential impact of the deployment in the recruitment process. Reflecting on his preparation for deployment, HN20 did not recall completing any specific training, but spent time in the SDS office where he met deployed officers, attended their meetings with managers, and read their reports. He does not remember there being a training manual for the unit or a tradecraft manual of advice. He believed officers were, quote, very much left to your own devices, end quote, on the subject of appropriate boundaries for involvement in the private lives of subjects. Commenting on sexual relationships, he recalls, quote, knowing that it would not be sensible to become sexually involved with women undercover because that sort of involvement was likely to lead to questions, end quote. But he does not remember whether that was an application of his own common sense or from some source within the SDS. HN20 does not recall, but expects that advice was given about participation in criminal acts and provoking criminal activity, and what to do if arrested in his undercover identity. He stated that he had no specific recollection of seeing the 1969 Home Office circular on informants who take part in crime, but noted that its general contents accord with common sense and his general knowledge as a serving police officer. He has also stated that he does not think that he would have known what legal privilege was at the time. HN20 has no specific memory of the process for obtaining the cover identity he adopted. He always believed he used the deceased child's identity during his deployment and stated that his identity was a child's in an impact statement from 2018. He had a driving license and passport in his cover identity. In his early deployment, HN20 spent time working as a driver, as a man with a van, for a laundry which he recalls he occasionally continued to perform. HN20 thinks he was tasked after a discussion with managers that included where coverage was required and where he would be comfortable operating. Once he was deployed, HN20 cannot recall being retasked or told to modify his reporting, with much of the details left to his discretion. HN20 understood the purpose of his deployment was to know whether activists would, quote, commit major criminal offences or just cause public disorder, end quote, and to discover, quote, risks to policing and to assist with policing London, end quote. HN20 found his way to the London Workers' Group, or LWG, after attending an anarchist bookshop or some other general meeting and thinking it was of interest to his deployment. The LWG was a group intending to support workers in ways which would, HN20 posits, ultimately lead to revolution. In a report attributed to HN20 dated May 1981, the group was said to be dominated by those with anarchist politics. Examples of HN20's reporting describe its conferences and planning meetings at public and private venues. He's recorded as speaking at the meeting, indicating the LWG support for a strike at a syndicalist conference in Conway Hall in November 1978. In March 1979, HN20 reports on what he states was a difficult period, both ideologically and in terms of membership, for the LWG. A series of earlier reports, which HN20 suggests may well be his, follow the detail of the group's internal dynamic. In January 1979, he reports ideological arguments within the group and discussions that public meetings remain suspended. And in February 1979, that it appears the LWG was considering its future, end quote. HN20 notes that on the same occasion in February, there was a proposal that the group carried out more direct action. Some of his reporting may have come from his having attended the homes of LWG members, and although in one case his statement is equivocal about the possibility of him having been told about the event afterwards, another report also from the same month, in February 1979, describes another meeting at a home address. By May 1981, HN20 reported that the group had approximately 10 active members, and assessed that it was unlikely to grow any further. Despite its small size, HN20 believes the group continued to provide him with a secure grounding among activists, and he cites his access to core participant Dave Morris as one example. He also stated his involvement meant he received intelligence on other groups and their plans. Another consideration for HN20 would have been the suspicion he would come under had he abandoned the group. He also cites the potential use for Special Branch to know that members of the group were unlikely to take part in illegal activities. He believed that small social functions hosted by the LWG were necessary to establish his identity, and because he was on duty, he would continue to produce reports. He states reporting on private functions was potentially useful as a, quote, piece of the intelligence jigsaw, end quote. HN20 considered the LWG to have subversive objectives. He believed that committed anarchists would seek to use disputes as vehicles for disruption. As such, he understood the LWG to be a threat to public order. Later, whilst he concluded that the group, to quote, was a lot of hot air, end quote, he believed it still aimed to cause disruption. In his statement, HN20 notes a report from November 1978 on an individual who is described to have a violent disposition and potential history of using incendiary devices and access to firearms. However, in his witness statement, he also notes that he did not think group members carried out any serious criminality, but would have approved of criminality's use. Instead, he recalls members of the group committing minor criminality, such as spray painting slogans. At the same time, HN20 reported on other anarchist projects. Among them, HN20 reported on Persons Unknown, a campaign group to support 6 anarchists standing trial on explosives charges, although he states he did not do so to the degree that the inquiry has attributed to him, and nor does he believe that he was tasked to do so. His attendance was partially motivated by preserving his credibility among LWG activists who attended its events, and the group's support for individuals accused of an explosives conspiracy was also, quote, of potential interest, end quote, suggesting support for violence and therefore a threat of public disorder. He believes Person Unknown had, quote, anti-establishment ideals. Apart from that, I'm not sure that they were necessarily subversive, end quote. Other reports submitted by HN20 identified details of individuals for special branch files. He reported on the names, descriptions, occupations, telephone and home addresses of individuals, and believed this information would assist in identifying individuals in special branch and security service records. In one report, he gave biographic details, including of 2 Australians living in a squat, and in another described a 3rd Australian joining them, noting that he hoped to join the Royal Parks Constabulary. He recalls being encouraged to attend weekly meetings with other undercover officers and managers at 2 flats. He states these meetings helped with bonding and to be kept informed of the subjects of general interest, including feedback from Special Branch and receiving police orders. Individual meetings with managers would also happen at the flats, alongside an exchange of information between undercover officers that could include sharing information of events of common interest to their deployments and general updates. HN20 believes managers would be generally aware of those discussions happening. He believes that there were facilities to write reports at these meetings and expenses would be dealt with. HN20 does not think he saw the intelligence reports in their finished form and expects that reports would have been typed up elsewhere. HN20 states that he received increased pay as a result of overtime work. He does not recall the rules for overtime payments, but did receive expenses covering the cost of cover accommodation. On the subject of senior management involvement, HN20 believes the head of Special Branch would visit the unit annually. The ACSO visited once during his deployment. He believes the Commissioner may also have visited. HN20 took on several positions of responsibility within the LWG, but states he does not believe he was tasked to reach a position of responsibility. He suggests the group gave him a degree of trust, and from the perspective, the posts gave him access to more intelligence. In December 1978, HN20 is described in a report as being appointed the publicity manager for the London Workers' Group. Then in October 1979, he is reported to have been elected as its treasurer, before November 1979, when Tony Williams is reported to have moved to become the group secretary. HN20 believes that he informed his managers of his election, in addition to what they would have been aware from his reporting. HN20 cannot remember what his precise responsibilities were as secretary. He assumes he would have taken minutes, and in January 1980, shortly after he began his role, HN20 included a mailing list for the group in a report. The same report describing his appointment also identifies HN20 as the author of a flyer for the group. Another from January 1982 notes that Tony Williams coordinates the design and production of the LWG bulletin. In common with his preparation to deploy, HN20 does not recall any guidance about the acceptable limits to the roles he took in his undercover identity. HN20 does not recall witnessing public disorder in London. He stated that there was more talk than action by the groups he infiltrated. In his statement, HN20 reflected that the purpose of Special Branch was to counter subversive activity and contribute to maintaining order. He states that anarchists, by their very nature, attempt to subvert democracy and the rule of law. He noted his reporting included the alleged connection between those accused of terrorism and anarchists shortly after the actions of the Red Brigades in Germany, which were likely to be of interest to the security services. HN20 travelled abroad overnight with his target group. He also visited the nuclear reactor site at Torness. HN20 is recorded as attending a meeting of the Revolutionary Prisoners Group in July 1979, where plans to glue the locks of postboxes near Wormwood Scrubs Prison were discussed, and Tony Williams was appointed to reconnoitre the area. HN20 had stated that he did not participate in gluing postboxes. He participated in fly posting during his deployment, but otherwise did not participate in criminal activity. Nor was he arrested, charged, or tried for any criminal offence, nor appeared as a witness in criminal proceedings. He did not join any trade unions whilst undercover, however he did report on the trade union membership of individuals. HN20 believes alternative methods for gathering intelligence on these groups would not have achieved similar results, and cited the cost and manpower required to complete surveillance to the same level. After his deployment, he believes the security service debriefed him at one of the SDS flats. This followed requests from the security service during his deployment for information on the content of LWG meetings and their attendees. HN20 suspected that the security service was shown his reports, given their interest in anarchism at the time. HN20 states he did not engage in sexual activity whilst in undercover identity. His personal relationships were closest with Dave Morris and a group of Australian activists who he would describe as casual friends, who would spend time in the Australian squatted home, eat together, and visit the pub. He has included in his inquiry witness statement that he was not aware of the allegation that HN67 had fathered a child whilst undercover until engaging in the inquiry's Rule 9 process. He states he was unaware of any contemporary engaging in sexual activity whilst deployed undercover. HN20 described his deployment coming to a natural end approximately 4 years into his deployment. At the end, he found the stress of deployment enormous, and it helped him initiate his exfiltration after he had, quote, had enough, end quote. He believed the weekly meetings and discussions with fellow UCOs, quote, served their purpose, end quote, in managing his welfare, but that nonetheless there was an impact on the work of individuals. He stated, quote, the SDS probably needed to have had more thought about the impact of members of the squad at a more senior level, end quote. He exfiltrated by telling activists he was going abroad after a period of voicing his wish to leave the group. So that concludes the summary of HN20's witness statement.
Thank you very much indeed. I will now ask Joe Hudson to read the summary of a civilian witness who goes under the cipher MSW.
Thanks, sir. Sir, this is an oral summary of the evidence of the witness known to the inquiry as MSW, insofar as it is relevant to Phase 1 of Tranche 2 of the inquiry.
I can't hear, sorry, can you talk into the microphone?
I'll try again.
Start again.
Sir, this is an oral summary of the evidence of the witness known to the inquiry as MSW, insofar as it is relevant to Phase 1 of Tranche 2 of the inquiry. MSW is a civilian witness who was reported on by SDS undercover officers during the Tranche 2 period. He has been granted anonymity at his request. He has provided a witness statement to the inquiry dated the 16th of May 2024, which will be published today on the inquiry website. During the Tranche 2 period, MSW was reported on principally by the following Phase 1 officers: HN20, cover name Tony Williams, and HN85, real name Roger Pierce, cover name Roger Thorley. MSW has no recollection of ever meeting either of them. MSW states that from 1979 to 1984, he was involved in, quote, anarchist, workerist, communist circles, end quote. MSW had a number of jobs in the printing trade, and this overlapped with his studies and political activism. He states that his days as an activist ended after his involvement in the News International dispute at Wapping in 1986. MSW states, quote, I was not involved in any covert illegal activity at any point when I was politically active. It may be possible that I was connected to people who were involved in this sort of activity, but I did not know about it, end quote. MSW states that he, quote, never had any interest or involvement with any animal rights organisations, campaigns or campaigners, end quote. This will become relevant in Phase 2 of Tranche 2. MSW describes his involvement with 3 groups in particular: the Anarchy Collective, the Autonomy Club, and London Workers Group. The Anarchy Collective. MSW was involved with the Anarchy Collective from November 1981 to March 1983, a group which published a magazine of anarchist theory named Anarchy. This was a splinter group from the Freedom Collective. MSW describes Anarchy as his baby for the 18 months of his involvement, essentially running it from his home, having rescued it following a period of decline. When he ceased to be involved with the Anarchy Collective in March 1983, he retained no ongoing links with the group or publication. The Autonomy Club. MSW was involved with the Autonomy Club from August 1981 to March 1982 as, quote, a supporter and sponsor rather than an active member, end quote. To MSW's understanding, the purpose of the Autonomy Club was, quote, to establish and run an anarchist social centre and event space, end quote. London Workers Group. MSW was involved with London Workers Group from December 1979 to July 1982. It was an open group which advertised its meetings in Time Out magazine. During the currency of MSW's involvement with the group, it had 10 regular attendees, MSW and 9 others, with a further 10 to 20 irregular attendees. MSW states that the group, quote, did not have a formal organisation structure, but there was always someone who was in charge of the money and took the minutes, so in theory performing treasurer and secretary roles, end quote. MSW does not recall whether he acted as treasurer for the group. To MSW's understanding, London Workers Group was, quote, a political group concerned with discussing and supporting workers' initiatives in the workplace, end quote. MSW does not recall any of those 3 groups being involved in incidents of public disorder. He describes London Workers Group as publishing, quote, rebellious, end quote, content in its bulletin, such as the article, We Want to Riot, Not to Work, which he considers, quote, should probably be understood as an expression of punk attitude to societal norms about the compulsion to wage labour, rather than actually advocating public disorder. It was riffing on the Brixton riots, end quote. MSW does not recall the Anarchy Collective or the Autonomy Club being involved in any law breaking. He states that those involved with London Workers Group, including MSW himself, occasionally engaged in mass picketing, including actions, quote, later deemed to be illegal on grounds like obstruction or breach of the peace, end quote. He states that none of the 3 groups used violence to achieve their aims and that they positively disapproved of violent strands of anarchism. MSW states that none of the groups regarded the overthrow of parliamentary democracy as a distinct aim, and it was not discussed. The groups variously theorised, propagandised, and organised, quote, towards a generalised social revolution which would produce its own organisational structures, end quote. MSW does not consider any of the 3 groups to have been successful in fomenting industrial unrest or, quote, recruiting people to the cause, end quote. He states that the groups were completely open and did not take security precautions. However, it was well known that police were surveilling workers and other campaigning groups. MSW was not surprised to learn undercover officers had reported on the groups with which he was involved, but he was shocked to hear of attendance in private homes. MSW feels vulnerable and disgusted that the information about him was recorded, retained, used, and disseminated by Special Branch. So that concludes the summary of MSW's evidence.
I think you're now going to turn to Albert Beale, are you not?
I am, sir, thank you. This is an oral summary of the evidence of Albert Beale, insofar as it is relevant to Phase 1 of Tranche 2 of the inquiry. Albert Beale is a civilian witness who was reported on by SDS undercover officers during the Tranche 2 period. He has provided a witness statement dated the 8th of March 2024, along with exhibits labelled AB1 to AB9. Those documents will be published today on the inquiry website. Albert Beale is 77 years old. During the Tranche 2 period, he was reported on principally by the following Phase 1 officers: HN20, cover name Tony Williams, HN65, cover name John Kerry, and HN85, real name Roger Pearce, cover name Roger Thorley. Mr. Beale states that he has spent much of his life, quote, concerned with issues of peace, justice, and sustainability, and trying to act on those concerns, end quote. On learning that he had been reported on, he felt betrayed and extremely unsettled. He gives an account of his early activism, which included involvement with pacifist groups and campaigning. He describes his approach to pacifism as not only involving a personal choice, but that it also, quote, behoves one to resist and impede the violence of others, end quote. He describes his involvement in campaigns on the subjects of anti-militarism, apartheid, feminism, and gay rights, particularly in Brighton. Mr. Beale describes his involvement with the group London Greenpeace, reporting on which will be considered more fully in Phase 2 of Tranche 2. Mr. Beale describes his involvement with various other groups reported on during the Tranche 2 period. Amongst other groups, he was involved with London Peace Action, quote, a local group of anti-militarist activists, end quote. He was involved with the Anti-Falklands War Support Network in supporting, quote, pacifists and others because of their opposition to the Falklands War, end quote. He was involved in a plan to establish the Federation of Anarcho-Pacifists, but doubts that he was the, quote, main initiator, end quote. Further, Mr. Beale describes his involvement with groups which were not necessarily directly reported on. These include Peace Pledge Union, which he describes as the main British pacifist organisation, War Resisters International, an international pacifist and anti-militarist network, Peace News Trustees Limited, the Campaign Against Arms Trade, and the ABC Defence Campaign, a defence campaign regarding 2 journalists and a soldier charged under the Official Secrets Act. Mr. Beale addresses the notions of public order and disorder in the context of the groups and campaigns with which he was involved. His view is that order is, quote, based on people's acquiescence to a system of economic injustice and to a system which is producing an ecosystem which will soon be inimical to the future existence of our species, end quote. He states that disorder, quote, is a matter of shaking up the status quo. In my view, our world is in greater need of some disordering, end quote. Mr. Beale thinks that most others involved in similar groups would have taken a similar view to him of disorder. He has what he describes as a, quote, personal position, end quote, in relation to the necessity of breaking the law. Quote, I see myself as generally committed to direct action. In other words, when doing what is necessary to follow my conscience, if that is judged to be in breach of some law, then so be it, end quote. However, Mr. Beale does not know what exact stance each of the people involved in the many organisations he describes would take. He considers violence to, quote, relate essentially to harming another person, end quote, and that damage to property is not in itself violent. He doubts that any of the groups or campaigns with which he was involved considered violence to be necessary to achieve their aims. Further, he finds the notion of overthrowing parliamentary democracy a puzzling one, not discussed in the groups or campaigns. Mr. Beale has considered the cover names of HN20, HN65 and HN85 and does not recall knowing any of them well, if at all. On learning that he had been reported on by undercover officers, Mr. Beale found it unnerving. He still considers the situation to be intolerable, as he is left, quote, wondering if there were other people I've known who might have been doing the same, end quote. So that concludes the oral summary of Albert Beale's evidence.
Thank you very much. We will now move to live evidence, and could Dave Morris please come forward to the witness stand?
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please take a seat.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Ms. Gargeter.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Morris. My name is Emma Gargeter. Is that better? I'll start again. Good morning, Mr. Morris. My name is Emma Gargeter. I'm going to be asking you questions on behalf of the inquiry as part of the counsel to the inquiry team. All right. Before I do that, can I ask, please, that your witness statement is just brought up on the screen. It's UCPI 036982. Right, that is page 1, I think, of a witness statement that you gave very recently to this inquiry, Mr. Morris. And if I can ask, please, that we go to page 64 of that statement straight away. And do we see there your signature on the 5th of June of this year?
Yeah, that's me, yes.
And can you confirm that that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Absolutely, yes.
And just so that it's clear for later purposes, this statement doesn't represent all of the written evidence that you intend to give to this inquiry. Is that right? You've got more to come in a second statement in due course.
That's correct, because of late disclosure of documents and then this section being split into 2 phases. I was advised to focus on certain things in the remaining time that I had left to do my statement. So I will do another statement later on.
Understood. So with that qualification, this statement stands as your written evidence for phase 1 of the inquiry, but there will be more to come.
Yes, that's correct.
Can I start then, Mr. Morris, please, by asking you a little bit about yourself and your activism, if I can call it that, in the late 1970s and early 1980s. So that's really the time period that we're focusing on in this phase. So I think you say in your witness statement, we can turn it up if it would assist, you just say, but you say that you were involved from about 1974 in a large range of groups and campaigns, trying to encourage people to support one another and make the world a better place. Does that sum it up in a line?
Yes.
Right.
It's a very short summary, yes. I mean, I was a postman in the 70s and active in my union. Obviously, I was involved with London Workers Group, which is a group that I helped to set up in the mid-1970s. I was also active in my local community around housing issues, which doesn't feature in the documentation. So I think this inquiry is only focusing on a narrow range of things that I was involved with.
All right, so insofar as SDS officers reported on you, and we'll come to some of those reports and the London Workers Group, that was only a narrow focus of your broader activism?
Yeah, it was an important focus, but it wasn't, taking up all my time. It was an important but a small part of my wider activities.
And so can you then, just fairly briefly, give us a flavour of the sorts of activities you were involved in that weren't being reported on by the SDS officers?
Yes, I mean, I was, as I said, I was a postman, I was involved with my union, and obviously I was going to work every day. And I lived in Islington and then Hackney, and I was involved with housing issues and campaigns, and obviously had a social life, that kind of thing,
Right,
really.
so, but in terms of what might be termed activism, it was housing issues primarily?
Yes, I would say so. In the 70s.
And then in the early 80s, did that change?
In the 80s, I travelled abroad in 1981, and then when I came back, I ended up living in Tottenham, where I still am, and my main focus ever since has been my local community in Tottenham, with various other activities as well, most notably, of course, the McDonald's libel case, the McLibel case, which took about 10 years of my life, and which was a bit of a sidetrack, really, because my main priority, really, since the early 80s has been my local community.
Right, understood. We'll come back to the McDonald's libel case in phase 2, so I'm not going to ask you any more questions about that now, but only because we'll come back to it later. All right. Can I just go back then to the groups that you were involved in the late 70s, early 80s, and can I ask, please, that we pull up on the screen to assist you paragraph 29 of your witness statement. That's UCPI 036982, page 6, please. And if I can focus your attention, please, Mr. Morris, on paragraph 29, you said this: almost all of the various groups I have been involved in over the decades have been open and democratically or collectively run and engaged in the kind of public activities which the public are invited to join in or to replicate for themselves, and which are essential if humanity is to progress and survive. Can I ask you, please, just to explain, when you say almost all of the groups were open, what do you mean by open?
So, open in that they were publicised, that people were invited to join and join in. They were collectively run in that people who came along weren't, if you like, foot soldiers, but they were equal part of the group if they wanted to get involved. Yes, and for example, London Workers Group, the meetings were publicised in all the publicity, and people were invited to come along and join in. And same with Anarchy magazine. And these were groups that were meeting weekly for many years, and they were open to anybody who supported the aims.
Just pausing, Anarchy magazine you mentioned, that was, I think you mentioned in your statement, the Tranche 1 officer, HN304 Graham Coates, in connection with that. Obviously Tranche 1 has been and gone, but that was an officer who reported on your activities in connection with Anarchy magazine, is that right?
Yes, so Graham Coates infiltrated Anarchy magazine, which was, as I say, an open collective. It was an educational magazine. People were encouraged to write. I think Graham Coates wrote 4 articles about housing and about work. I think he wrote articles about, which were published. In my statement, I quote what he said, his conclusion, which I'd like to read out, after infiltrating Anarchy magazine and the anarchist movement for 3 or 4 years.
Can you just tell us which paragraph you're going to
Oh, sorry,
quote
this is
from?
paragraph 39.
Thank you. Page 8.
And he said, in his witness statement, paragraph 110, quotes, "The anarchists I reported on posed a minimal challenge to public order and, quote, did not even really discuss activities that would be a public order threat." And in paragraph 113, he wrote, "I do not think either the International Socialists or the anarchist movement was subversive in terms of their actions." And finally, quote, "I do not believe any information I provided was particularly significant. I do not think it would have made any difference to public order if I had not worked for the SDS."
And do I take it from you quoting that that's something that you agree with, that evidence?
Yes, I'd say so.
Before we go any further, can I ask you a little bit about anarchism and what it meant to you and the groups? And can we just turn back in your statement, please, to paragraph 30 to see how you describe it? So page 6 of the statement, please. I'm just going to double check that because I might have got the wrong paragraph. Sorry, bear with me a moment.
Paragraph 30 is pretty good.
All right. Well, do you want to start there? Why don't you start there and tell me, Mr. Morris?
Well, such groups, so these are the groups that I was involved with, and other similar groups. Such groups, as we all should, question and challenge those institutions which wield power over people's lives and control the world's resources and decision-making. I mean, I won't read it all out. Such powerful institutions are generally tightly controlled by a small self-serving elite, continually obsessed with power and profit. They're ruthless and unaccountable and are prepared to use violence routinely to maintain their power and control over people and society. And I go on to say that I think they are the real subversives, the people that are actually running the world, because they subvert human society and our natural desire to cooperate and share and make decisions together.
Would you agree that in its theory, as a political theory, anarchism would call for the abolition of the current system of parliamentary democracy to be replaced with a different system of organisation of society?
Yes, in paragraph 36, which you might want to get up.
Page 7.
So I looked up a definition on the Oxford English Dictionary online, and the definition of anarchism is, quote, "a political theory advocating the abolition of hierarchical government and the organisation of society on a voluntary cooperative basis without recourse to force or compulsion."
And is that what it meant to you in the late 1970s when you were involved in these various sort of
Yes, I
anarchist
think
groups?
that people controlling their own lives together and sharing and making decisions collectively is real democracy.
The groups that you were involved in, can you give us an idea of the extent to which you hoped to bring about that change?
Yes, I think that obviously I'm looking back at that time, rather than saying what my position now or whatever. I think my politics have stayed the same, although my tactics have evolved and my priorities have evolved over the last 50 years, which is something I suppose that you would expect of anybody. But what was the question again?
Can you give us a flavour, an idea of the extent to which the groups that you were involved in wanted to bring about that sort of change that the definition of anarchy
Yes, absolutely.
suggests?
Absolutely. I think that society is dominated by the ideas of the rich and powerful, and they impose their ideas by force and by hierarchy and by control of the media. So it's really important that people create groups and get together and spread alternative ideas. whether they're anarchist ideas or in local community groups, ideas about what's really important and how people can make a real difference in their everyday lives and support each other and spread mutual aid and solidarity and question the prevailing ethos, which is greed is good, power is something that, that should be aspired to. And there are alternatives, which is that decisions should be made that are for the public good, not for private profit, and society should be run for the benefit of people, not for those who have the power and wealth.
What I'm trying to get at, Mr. Morris,
that's the educational
that's the
side of it.
The theory, the ideas, the intention, if I can put it that way.
But also I think that groups that are trying to make the world a better place should try to show by the way they organise that the process and the practice should be a good example for other people that they can replicate or be inspired by. It doesn't always happen that way, but that's what you hope.
So one of the sort of types of action that you were taking, if I can put it that way, is showing by example how you considered the society might be better organised than the status quo. Is that a fair way to summarise that? Were there any other forms of action being debated or being taken, more importantly?
I think that the groups that I was involved with and still am also want to actually change things or want to see changes made. So you hope that by calling on people to challenge the power of those who have the power and wealth in our society, that's part of it too. It's not just about spreading ideas in the abstract or showing an alternative way of doing things. It's also encouraging people by encouraging them to feel that actually it's our society and that people should be making the decisions and challenging the decisions that are being made by those at the top.
And would the sort of actions that you would encourage, would that encompass actions that would be against the law?
Well, it might do. I don't think it's a question of how can we break the law. It's more, what do people need to do to change things? And that may include activities that are breaking the law. Because there are laws, of course, which are unjust and unfair, and there's a long tradition in our society of challenging such unfair and unjust laws.
So
there's also laws which are supposed to protect the public, which are broken by those who actually have the power. I mean, a good example is there are laws to protect tenants, and private tenants in particular, which are routinely on a mass scale broken by landlords, for example. And the police almost never intervene to prevent, for example, illegal evictions. And there's like tens of thousands every year of illegal evictions by landlords. So there are laws which are which people have campaigned and fought for over generations, which are protective of society, but which are not enforced. So it's not just about encouraging people to break the law, it's also encouraging people to assert their rights where we've managed to win rights.
But if I can put the point shortly, within the groups that you were mixing in the late 1970s and early 1980s, if a law was seen as unjust or unfair, then it might be seen as legitimate to break that law. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, but I don't think you see it in that way. You're engaged in activities that are encouraging people, say for example, to go on strike, and then if they do that, they may come up against laws which are trying to prevent them from going on strike or to organise a union in their workplace. And we're talking about London Workers' Group here, for example. So, obviously breaking the law has consequences, so people have to think carefully when they're involved in movements and campaigns about what is achievable and and so on, yes.
Can I come on, before we move to look at the groups in detail and perhaps some examples to help you explain some of this, can I ask about your own personal approach to taking direct action of any sort? During that time, I'm still focusing on late 70s, early 80s. Before I do that, I think in your statement you are keen to express or to provide a definition of violence that you are content with, if I can put it that way, which I think you define as unjustifiable force in your witness statement.
That's how the dictionary defines violence, unjustifiable force.
And I think you say in your statement that you don't support premeditated violence against individuals, but
No.
you do support the right to self-defence.
Yes. Cool, that's a lot to cope with in one sentence there. But so first of all, I don't think I've ever advocated violence. The word violence is not something I would use. Violence, to me, unjustifiable force, is what the entire social system that we're forced to live under is really maintained by. In terms of self-defence, in specifically, I would say that the law of this country, recognises the right to self-defence as long as it's proportionate, and also 99% of the public believe in the right to self-defence. Obviously, it starts getting more complicated when, say, for example, if people are being evicted from their homes by bailiffs, I would say that the landlords are employing violence to deny people their homes. So people would be justified in defending themselves and trying to stay in their homes. So I would call that self-defence rather than violence.
Right, so that's an example for us of your idea. And you say in your statement that you don't think you've used physical force against anyone ever deliberately or by way of retaliation.
No.
Yourself personally. Were you willing to encourage others to use violence against the person ever?
I don't believe I ever encouraged anybody to use violence, but I may have encouraged people to defend themselves.
Can you break that? When you say defend themselves but no violence against the person, what would defending themselves consist of?
Well, as I say, for example, if bailiffs are trying to throw them out of their home,
what would you encourage them to do?
I don't really encourage individuals to put themselves at risk. I'd rather people support each other collectively and create movements to support each other. So, for example, it's very difficult for individuals facing eviction from their house to physically defend themselves and try and stay in that building, but they can be part of a movement that challenges evictions or the power of bailiffs. And it's the same in workplaces. It's not really about individuals workplaces, because we're going to come on to the London Workers Group, workplaces are a dictatorship. Yeah? Workplaces and industries are controlled from the top, and workers have almost zero say, and if they're given an order, they have to obey it or they can be sacked. Now, being sacked is an act of violence. Losing their job, losing their income, maybe even being made homeless if they can't pay their mortgage or their rent. So, but you cannot, you can't really encourage people as individuals to make a difference. Then people have to organise where they work in every workplace throughout the world, because every system in the world is the same. So London Workers Group, for example, a key aim would be to encourage workers to get together and support each other collectively in every workplace in the UK and throughout the world, to stand up for their rights as workers.
Can I ask that we look at a couple of reports written about you and your role and your attitudes by the Officer HN20, Tony Williams, by way of example?
Okay, yes.
So could we call up, please, UCPI 0217, 21277. 21277. It's a report, sir, dated the 22nd of May of 1979, and it is in your bundle at B22. So, B22. Right, so Mr. Morris, a report written by HN20 Tony Williams, and it expresses itself at paragraph 1, as you'll see, as reviewing the activities of you. And at paragraph 2, it says of you, for several years now, Morris has held a key position in the anarchist movement in general, but more particularly in the affairs of London-based anarchists. So far, accurate?
Well, I wouldn't say I have a key position in the anarchist movement. I've been active, well, certainly at that time, was active in the anarchist movement for many years. Yeah.
Okay. If we look at paragraph 4, please, as far as his, that's your, political activities are concerned, there can surely be very few people in any political sphere who could match his devotion and enthusiasm. He is moreover held in high esteem by such worthy anarchists as Albert Meltzer and Stuart Christie. Indeed, Meltzer is known to have remarked that Morris is the key figure in anarchist politics in the South East. Again, do you agree with that description of yourself?
Not really, no. I think that the whole point of anarchist politics is that everybody's important, and people need to work together and create groups and movements and campaigns that aren't dependent on individuals. I know that doesn't always happen that way, but every effort should be made to be as inclusive and encourage forms of organisation where people have control over their activities. It's the same for workers. I mean, trade unions are run by a union hierarchy, but London Workers' Group approach wasn't to encourage people to become union bosses, but to encourage people to organise in each workplace, independently, if you like, through a shop steward system or through having collective groups or union branches that are based in workplaces. So it's flattering, but I'm not really comfortable with the way that's being put.
Understood. Can I ask now, please, for us to look at paragraph 5? All right, so this paragraph describes you as an archetypal anarchist, cherishing the ideals and theories laid down by Kropotkin. And then it says this: whilst he frequently talks of resorting to violence to achieve these aims, he just as frequently argues against adopting such tactics. It is, accordingly, somewhat difficult to state with certainty whether Morris would ever ally himself with traditional bomb-throwing anarchists. Right, so firstly, the first part first, frequently talks of resorting to violence to achieve anarchist aims. What do you have to say about that?
So firstly, I have to say I haven't read Kropotkin, but he's a famous anarchist from 100 years ago. He's one of the founders of freedom, which no doubt you'll hear about later on. So I've never, as far as I can recall, encouraged people to resort to violence. What can you say? I mean, I think that all political philosophies, if you like, are based on violence, except complete non-violence advocates. So, for example, people that want to get into government, which is pretty much all of the political tendencies in our society, government is based on violence. I mean, the police force, it's called a force because it's a force that uses violence to maintain the status quo. And all of the political parties govern through that system. I mean, obviously the political parties are only a small part of a ruling class, which includes... I would say I was opposed to violence. Now, in terms of people changing the world, what I want to see is people taking control of their own lives in every workplace, in every community, and on the land. And unfortunately, if they try to do that, they will be met by ruthless force from the system that we're forced to live under. They will be stopped from taking control of their own neighbourhoods or their own workplaces. So that's where the problem comes, is that you're facing a ruthless force trying to keep you in your place. So, you know, I would say people have a right to defend themselves and defend their communities in that situation.
But could that involve resorting to violence in order to meet the force?
Well, I wouldn't use the word violence. I would say that people, you know, may need to counter violence if they're faced with it.
But how would a person counter violence if faced with it as an individual in that?
Well, I don't think it would be about individuals. It would be about collectives. I mean, everybody would agree with this. I mean, some people feel the Second World War was about opposing fascism, and the state mobilised almost the entire economy, the entire population, to physically resist what could have been an invasion from fascist forces, and everybody would support that. But that was mass violence. In fact, it went well beyond any kind of... that ended with a nuclear bomb dropped on 2 towns in Japan, killing hundreds of thousands of people. And that was... that's the worst single incident of violence ever in history, and that was supported by the British government, and obviously it was carried out by the US government. So, and they tried to justify it at the time as being necessary to end the war. So all I'm saying is that, everything should be done in trying to make the world a better place to minimise violence or conflict as much as possible.
Can we perhaps turn...
Yeah, so obviously we could discuss this and debate this all day, but it's...
Yes, there's another witness to come this afternoon. I'm just going to ask if we can have a look at another report, just by way of an example of what was being reported about things. UCPI 014263, a report dated the 10th of September of 1980. Paragraph 5, and sorry, I should say for your bundle reference that would be B51.
Thank you.
Mr. Morris, this is in fact a group about the we've already gone to paragraph 5, about the Ecology and Anarchy Collective, but at paragraph 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down towards the end of that line. So the paragraph starts about talking about Albert Beale of Peace News, and talking about shelters nuclear fallout shelters. Is the context of
Right.
this. You can have a look at the rest of the document, but it says this about you. As a result, Dave Morris has suggested that anarchist groups in London take direct action against such manoeuvres, that's army manoeuvres, in order to bring it to the attention of the public. Suggestions of the contemplated action were barricading a street, altering street signs, putting traffic lights out of action, painting messages and slogans, posters, taking over a railway station.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what this is referring to.
Yeah, if we zoom, can we
Is
zoom-
this in a situation where there's almost civil war going on, and I don't understand?
Right, I'll let you look at the report before we zoom in. So if we go, it's a Ecology and Anarchism collective. It starts the report by talking about them being on the verge of collapse. And then if you go down to paragraph 4, it says, following the dismal failure of various actions at the proposed Torness nuclear reactor site and the virtual collapse of the Torness Alliance, the ENA have decided to concentrate on other issues as well as nuclear reactors. The collective intends gathering information on government nuclear fallout shelters and their locations, with the eventual hope of gaining entry to one of them. So that's the context is
Yes.
that.
I can't really understand how that's jumped to things that it suggested that I said, which seem to be things that are quite in a much more dramatic situation of conflict between the government and civil society. I don't know. I can't. Obviously, the nuclear fallout shelters mirror maybe what was happening in the early 60s when there were secret government bunkers in case of nuclear war, where the government had decided that it would try and survive while the public were being fried to a cinder in their millions. And some of those shelters were occupied by peace activists. So maybe that's the sort of people in this group were reflecting on some of that earlier ways of exposing, what the government plans were in case of serious nuclear catastrophe. But actually, I think I was leaving the group at this time anyway. So I don't know. I can't really speak for...
Okay. So I suppose the question I really have about this is this report at paragraph 5 suggests you making suggestions about the sort of direct action that could be taken. And the sorts of direct
Yes.
action it suggests you had in mind were things like barricading a street, putting traffic lights out of action, painting messages and slogans,
Yes.
taking over a railway station. I suppose the point of the question really is that the sort of action that you were supportive of, would have encouraged at around that time?
No.
No, it's not.
No.
Well, I've read out the paragraph of the report. It doesn't say that's exactly what you said, but it says the sorts of actions that were being contemplated. And my question is that the sort of action you would have contemplated? I think that's, if it's not clear, Mr. Morris.
Not
do
really,
say.
no. I mean, as I say, it seems to be a different discussion. But barricading a street, I think that's been done in many circumstances. That kind of thing is not my idea. It's maybe something that, as an example from history of what people have done to defend themselves. I mean, barricading a street has been done many times throughout history for different reasons, maybe to prevent fascists entering that street, such as in Cable Street, conflict between fascists and the community. Altering street signs, that sounds like something that might be done during a wartime. I know that when I was in Poland, for example, people told me that during the war, people swapped all the numbers on the houses so that if fascists were who were, the Nazis, invaded and they were looking for particular people, they couldn't find those people. So I don't know, I can only, surmise,
All right. I'm going to.
I can't
ask you to
remember this
pause.
conversation.
That's fine. Let's move on. I'll ask you some questions, I think, specifically about the London Workers Group now, because that's obviously a group that was, I think you said you're one of the founders of that group. Can I just ask you this? We don't necessarily need to bring the report up, but there is a report in which HN20 Tony Williams describes the London Workers Group as your brainchild. Would you agree with that? So that's in his witness statement. Would you agree with that?
Not really, no. I think that I was involved with, for a short time with a group called the Libertarian Industrial Network, which was a national network of people in workplaces that wanted to make a radical change. So a few of us that were in London and in that network decided that we should have a London group and make it a very inclusive and open group, and that's how the London worked. I was one of the 3 founders of that group.
All right, so there were 2 others with you.
There were 2 others. One was a railway worker and the other was a print worker, and I was a postman.
In terms of the numbers of people that were involved in that group at any one time, can you give us an idea of how big a group it was?
Yes, I think it went on for about 8 or 9 years. I wasn't so much involved towards the end. You know, there were some very small meetings of maybe 4 or 5 people, and there were, you know, meetings also of 25, 30 people. I think at one time, maybe for a few years, it might have averaged between 10 and 20. And we met in a room in a pub, different, well, actually we also met in a bookshop as well at part of the time. So yeah, it was quite a small group. But we had a mailing list, I think at the height of about 120 supporters, which are Tony Williams stole the mailing list, and that's one of the documents.
Yes, we'll come on
Yes.
to that in one of his roles with the group. So mailing out literature to that many people,
Yes.
but regular meetings much smaller of people who attended.
Yes, I think all the meetings were publicised, like in Time Out, I think was mentioned, but we also did mail-outs regularly to all our supporters. Yeah.
Could we have a look at some of the reporting that Tony Williams did on the group to see whether you agree with the accuracy of what was being reported? First of all, UCPI 012887, so that's B3 in your bundle. And this is a report dated the 16th of October 1978. Mr. Morris, the inquiry thinks that this is probably the earliest report that's definitely Tony Williams reporting on LWG. And if we can have a look at paragraph 1 of the report, he described the London Workers Group as a loose-knit collective of libertarians and anarchists. Their aims are to study all industrial disputes
Occurring,
thank you, in the London area, and to actively support the workers involved by producing leaflets and assisting with pickets, etc. They believe that by this method, they will be able to persuade workers that anarcho-syndicalism is the correct path to revolution. First half of that, the description of a loose-knit collective with aims to study industrial disputes and actively support workers involved by producing leaflets, etc. Is that an accurate description of the group's makeup and its aims?
yes, I suppose so, yes.
And then when it goes on, they believe that by this method, they will be able to persuade workers that anarcho-syndicalism is the correct path to revolution. Do you consider that to be an accurate summation?
I think if that was what we were saying to people, we wouldn't have got very far. I think that
Why do you say that?
what you're trying to persuade people is that they can organise themselves, they can support each other, they can stand up for their rights, they can challenge the power of their bosses, they can link up with other workplaces throughout their industry, that I think that the kind of that's the most important thing. Obviously, we would hope they may draw conclusions that if you're empowered collectively to support each other and challenge the power of those who control you in the workplace, you might think, well, wouldn't it be good if we did control the workplace ourselves and society was run in such a way? But, you know, that's a big step for a lot of people. So that's why I think that that's not a good summary. The second half of that paragraph is not a good summary of what we were hoping people might take from our involvement and encouragement, by interacting with them.
Understood. Could we have a look, please, at paragraph 4 of the same report? And in particular this, it describes the group as, to date, they remain too small an organisation to be of any real influence in industrial disputes, etc. Do you agree with that as a sentiment?
Yes, we were a small organisation. I think you can be influential as a small group of people in different circumstances. And so one thing that we did try to do is encourage groups of activists in different industries. So, for example, in the post office, I was involved with a group called Rank and File Post Office Worker, where we linked up with other postal workers around the country, and we produced our own newsletters and so on. And we tried to have an influence within our industry. And I think that London Workers Group, there were a few print workers associated with the group. I think there were some health workers as well. So we tried to encourage people to form groups and hopefully attract other people into those groups. Not that we would control them. So I think that you can have an influence beyond your numbers if people like what you're saying.
Okay, so to that extent...
But in general, it's accurate, yes.
Can we turn, please, to another report? So that report was October 1978, and now report in November, UCPI 012957. So for your bundle, it's B6. All right, so Monday the 30th of October, 1978, a meeting of the London Workers Group, described here as a private meeting, Mr. Morris, at the Rising Free Bookshop. Do you see that?
Yes, it wouldn't really be private. I think all the meetings of London Workers Group were open. Some were publicised, particularly because we had a theme, so we called them public meetings. But I would say that the other meetings weren't private. So in that respect, they're not private in such as a group of mates meeting who didn't want anyone else to come. I think all the meetings of London Workers Group were open.
So open to other people coming along,
yes,
but not publicised. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they were publicised in the bulletins. There's I think one of these documents has a little strap line at the end, one of the bulletins, and it says at the end, we meet every week at such and such a venue, but obviously we also had regular, I think monthly, for some years, public meetings on different issues relevant to workers. Which we publicised and obviously hoped that would get bigger turnouts.
Okay. I'm going to skip now, or ask that we skip to paragraph 5 of the report, but to give you some context, you can come back to it if you need to, Mr. Morris. There are discussions at this meeting about strikers at the Garner's Steakhouse. Does that ring bells with you?
Yes.
So I think striking workers in the catering industry, broadly speaking, not British nationals working in the catering industry. Is that a fair very high-level summary of the nature of the strike.
Yeah, it
start
wasn't
with.
just people from non-British nationals. It was, yes, a whole range of people who worked in a low-paid catering chain, yes.
What it says, so it says conversation later turned, this is the meeting described as a private meeting, conversation later turned to the future tactics of the group itself, and it was generally agreed that more direct action should be adopted by members. Dave Morris suggested that a practical way of assisting the strikers of the Garner's Steakhouse chain was to smash the restaurant windows or simply enter, order food, and then walk out. After some discussion, however, it was decided that it was better at this stage to join the picket lines. Dave Morris said that he would contact other anarchists and libertarians and invite them to help. So, first question, suggestion of more direct action, and then the report records you suggesting that one of the things you could do would be to smash the restaurant windows.
Okay.
Do you agree that that's the sort of action that you encouraged or would have encouraged?
Well, I remember about the this conversation, including about ordering food and walking out. I don't remember anything about saying smashing restaurant windows, and I certainly wouldn't advocate that, especially if there were people in the restaurant.
What about if there weren't?
Well, hang on a second, let me just finish. So the group decided it was better to join the picket lines. Can I just say, just in terms of the words direct action, and London Workers Group helped to set up this national network that was called the Direct Action Movement. Direct action is people taking action rather than, collectively trying to change things without, for example, relying on a change in the law or somebody else to do it for them. So a strike is direct action. So they were on strike, so the workers had already taken direct action. So I think there's a misunderstanding about the word direct action, and definitely about the direct action movement, which was called that in contrast to the kind of hierarchical trade union controlled disputes. It was more about people running their own disputes and trying to, enforce their rights through collective action. So I don't remember anything about saying smashing restaurant windows, and I would say you said that if people weren't there. I can't remember advocating that. It may have been that other people said things. It may have been I was articulating a range of activities that people had suggested and summing up. And I know that at the time, because I was aware that you were going to ask me about this, that there was quite a big campaign against Barclays Bank by anti-apartheid activists in this country for many years, and breaking the windows of Barclays Bank was seen as a legitimate tactic to try to prevent them investing in South Africa, which was an apartheid regime. So I think that smashing windows as a tactic seemed to have started appearing on kind of brainstorming of suggestions. But I note that actually what we decided at this meeting was to join the picket lines.
Okay, but it wouldn't surprise you if at a meeting at around that time, smashing of windows was a sort of suggestion that someone might have made in terms of direct action?
I don't think that suggestion would have come up often.
Can we turn to another report now, please? I want to ask you some questions about what the London Workers...
Can I just say one other
Sorry.
thing? Is that one of the aims of London Workers Group, and I believe one of the documents has the aims, was to support workers in disputes. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was by asking them what kind of support they wanted. So not substituting ourselves, acting for those people, but asking them what kind of action they would like in their support. I think that's quite important, rather than trying to tell people what to do or whatever.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask, we have to take a break shortly for the stenographer, but I'm just going to ask
Okay.
we look at one more report.
Yes.
Before we do. It's UCPI 013163, a report of the 21st of February of 1979. So it's B12 in your bundle. And we see it's a report on a meeting of the London Workers' Group that took place on the 5th of February of 1979 at the Metropolitan Public House on Farringdon Road. So I think that you said a lot of the meetings took place in a pub.
In a booked room that we paid for, not in the...
a private room in the pub. And if we just move down, paragraph 4, please. It says of you that you thought that there should be private discussions during the next few weeks in order to decide what sort of group the LWG should be. At this point, somebody let it be known that in his view there should be more direct action and less time spent in trying to attract new members and in publishing bulletins that were not read. In disagreeing with this, someone else presumably showed himself to be alone. Someone commenting that it was the first LWG meeting that she had attended, considered the group was ideally suited for concentrating on a dispute by a single category of workers, etc., etc.
Yeah, she worked in a hospital, yes, as it says, yes.
Yeah. So I just want to ask you, it says that you thought there should be private discussions to decide what sort of group LWG should be. Why, if you can remember, why you were suggesting there should be private discussions about the group?
It may be that that rather than have continuous, like every month, public meetings on all different issues, that the group needed some time to talk about its kind of strategy. And I wouldn't say they were private discussions. I would say that they were the routine weekly meetings that were advertised, if you read the bulletins, but not publicised in particular with a particular theme. So I think that what that means there was a time for a few months where the group felt it needed to kind of work out what it was doing, and I agree with what the woman said about supporting specific disputes and also attracting new people. Yes.
Right, so just in case it might be read, for example, this paragraph, as the meeting in private being connected to the taking more direct action. So if someone read that as suggesting, for example, that the group was moving towards private meetings because actually it wanted to advocate for more direct action, would that be the right way to read what was going on?
No, I'd say that's completely wrong. I think this was, and I've read similar reports around this time, this was a time for the group to kind of think about its strategy, how to involve more people, what kind of disputes we should support, whether we should support unionisation drives. So some disputes were about unionisation and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. So with an eye on the time, I
Yes.
wonder if now might be a break for the stenographer.
Yes. We will now break for a quarter of an hour to permit our transcriber to have a well-deserved break. Quarter of an hour.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Morris, I'm just asked to take you back to the report we were looking at before the break, 013163, and just to show you for completeness paragraph 5. So this is the report that I was showing you about the suggestion of private meetings, and it just records the outcome. The outcome was a general agreement that the LWG should cease to function in its present form and that there should be a series of private weekly meetings immediately to discuss the problem and to increase the political awareness of each member. I think that's broadly consistent with what you were telling me before
Yes.
the break.
Well, I wouldn't say they were private. I would say they were just not publicised.
Yeah. Okay, so
But
not,
anyone could have attended who knew that we had weekly meetings.
yeah, but you weren't actively seeking the public
Correct.
to come into them. So thank you. Can we take that down? And can we have a look, please, now at a report UCPI 018657. That's your B80, sir.
Thank you.
And Mr. Morris, this is moving on a number of years in time. So we were just looking at a report from 1979, and we're now looking at a report from September 1982, still Tony Williams reporting. It is another report on the London Workers Group at paragraph 2. It says it continues to flourish in spite of the number attending the regular Tuesday meetings being reduced on occasion to a handful of persons, and as you said before, the meetings held at the Metropolitan Public House on Farringdon Road. Can we go down to paragraph 3, please? You are listed there as one of what's described as the principal activists within the group, along with a number of others. It says it still remains a group of anarchists, with the exception of a particular individual. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then can we go down, please, to paragraph 6, the conclusion of the report. The conclusion of the report is this: the LWG is unable to develop beyond a theoretical discussion group, and the apparent inability to become involved in industrial disputes or attract a larger following causes frustration and inevitably a constant change in membership. The few anarchists who have remained with the group since its inception use the meetings merely to exchange gossip and to keep in touch with other anarchists. The group is unlikely to expand in the foreseeable future and will almost certainly remain in their present state. To what extent do you agree with that conclusion?
Well, I don't think it's a very good summary. I think it was more than a theoretical discussion group. All the times that I was involved with it, it was always producing literature for distribution, so spreading ideas. It was always open to anybody to get involved. It did support industrial disputes to the best of its ability, but it was a small group. I wouldn't say meetings were about exchanging gossip and to keep in touch with other anarchists. I think the meetings, we would always talk about our own experiences where we worked. By this time, actually, I was unemployed, but I was involved with, I was starting to be involved in unemployed and claimants organisations. Throughout the 1980s, I was very active in the Tottenham Claimants Union, which I helped to set up, and the National Federation of Claimants Unions, which was a federation of about 100 different local claimants unions around the country. So even though I was no longer in a workplace, I was still involved, but I got less involved at this time. And in fact, after this period, when I was less involved in the group, the bulletins became more theoretical and not so much my cup of tea. I'm much more about engaging with people and getting involved with disputes and so on, rather than long theoretical debates and articles. Yes. So I think that it's got an element of truth in it, but I don't think it's overall very accurate.
Thank you. Can we please bring up HN20's witness statement? That is MPS 0745971 at page 24.
Can I just say something? Because I think you probably won't bring up, but there's a few interesting documents. I went to Poland in 1981, which was the Solidarność period, and got involved with some solidarity activists in Lublin, town in Poland, and that had quite a big effect on me in terms of my own personal trajectory, if you like, to see how it's possible to be part of a real mass movement with Solidarity created a movement of 10 million members in a space of a few months. It was interesting because at one point in Poland, print workers took strike action. In fact, for them, it was occupying all the print works in Poland were occupied. Every single print shop in Poland was occupied against the government controlling the media. I went into one of the occupied print shops, and I did talk about the London Workers' Group, and I remember them saying that with translators, that they wanted to influence what the government was allowing to be put in the media. And they themselves, as strikers or occupiers, were producing their own daily bulletins to hand out. So I was saying to them, "You are the media. You have taken over the media. All of the national publications, news publications, ceased to function, and they put out their own daily bulletins." So that's an example of direct action. Instead of lobbying for the government to change the way it exercised its power, they were actually taking direct action and taking control of their own workplaces and the media.
So an example of the sort of direct action.
Yes,
that
but
you were
the biggest thing that I got from Poland was I began to focus a lot more on community, thinking about how we could create movements of hundreds of thousands, hopefully millions of people. And yes, sorry, that's just an important moment in my life.
Yeah, thank you. Can I take you back, just moving us on, Mr. Morris, no disrespect to you, just
No.
conscious that the
No,
time
I
is ticking on.
understand.
HN20's witness statement, please, at paragraph 77, should be page 24, I hope. And I just want to ask you about his conclusion. He was asked about the aims and objectives of the LWG, and about, I think it's 4 lines down, he says this: "I eventually came to the conclusion that there was a lot of hot air, whilst I eventually came to that conclusion, there was an apparent preparedness to use disputes and issues with public support as a vehicle for disruption." And then he gives us an example, May 1980 Torness demonstration, which I'll come back to in detail. He says the LWG, wanted to be a catalyst for others to lose control. To what extent do you agree with that description of the group?
No, I'd say this is nonsense. And I haven't said that about a lot of his reporting, which I think a lot of it is quite, accurate in many ways, not always. But this is, hot air, I don't know what he means by hot air, but people talking if you create a group at weekly meetings and you produce leaflets and bulletins, you obviously have to talk a lot. Maybe he was disappointed that he would expect, that people would be out smashing windows on a regular basis, and that was not happening. So, and I don't think it's a travesty to say that we're using disputes and issues with public support as a vehicle for disruption. The point is to support workplace disputes and other public campaigns because they are needed, and hopefully they should get stronger and spread.
And what about this concept that we see here, that you and the group might sit back and either encourage others to, or perhaps just be pleased if others were to lose control? So others might do your dirty work for you, is another way to put it.
Complete nonsense.
Just sticking with HN20's witness statement for now, if we can, and if we go please to paragraph 79, so on the next page. And I just want to, about halfway down, I'm not going to take you to that particular report, but halfway down he says, I recall minor criminality taking place, such as spraying slogans. I do not think that the members generally carried out any serious criminality, but they might well have approved of it. And then he refers to overlap with the persons unknown group, which I'll come back to. First of all, recalls minor criminality such as spraying slogans. Is he accurate in that recollection? As far as you can
I don't remember
say?
London Workers Group ever themselves doing graffiti. I think doing graffiti as part of movements for change is quite traditional in this country, and as we've heard, a lot of the undercover police officers took part in doing graffiti. It was seen as something pretty normal. So.
All right. And then when he says he doesn't think members generally carried out any serious criminality, you would agree?
Well, I can't speak for all members. If we had 120 members, I mean, he quotes earlier on in that paragraph an individual who, I mean, obviously individuals can have all kinds of views, but the key thing is what we did as a group collectively.
Yeah.
And I don't even think we ever did any graffiti.
And what about approving of serious criminality, even if it's committed by others? So taking what's at the top, firebombing property, for example, or something like that?
No, the aims and objectives of London Workers Group were set out in the aims and principles, and unless a decision was made at a meeting, for a specific purpose or activity, then it's just individual points of view. Random individual points of view, which could be anything.
Thank you. I want to turn now to focus specifically on HN20 himself within the group. I just wanted to go to another paragraph of the witness statement before it comes down. Page 27, paragraph 84, please. I want to ask you, Mr. Morris, about what HN20 has to say about why he continued to report on the group. If he thought, as some of the reports I've shown you suggest, that it was unlikely to grow any bigger, that it was a sort of a talking shop, as he termed it. So he says this: LWG had and continued to provide me with a secure grounding with people such as Dave Morris, where I would glean information from those people and also be able to attend other meetings. Also, it would have weakened my credibility if I had abandoned a group that I had apparently supported for a long time. From your point of view, looking back at his role and his activities such as they were in the London Workers Group, if he had said to you one day, actually, do you know what, I'm thinking of not coming to the meetings anymore, do you think that would have caused him to fall under suspicion?
Absolutely not.
And can you explain
People came and went. They had their own lives. they might move on to something else. It's, I've seen a lot of the spies' witness statements. A lot of them say that, but I think it's pretty much rubbish. I think that people came and went in groups. I left the group eventually. I just think it's not true.
Can we take the witness statement down, please, and bring up instead a report? So you will find this in the bundle for HN20 rather than for Mr. Morris. It's a report UCPI 013047.
Yeah, can I say, just in the over the last question, last point, is that why would we suspect? Why would we be suspicious? It was an open group. The meetings were publicised every week, weekly. It's incredible. It met for about 8 or 9 years every week. So I don't think anybody was. I don't remember any kind of need to be suspicious at all.
Thank you. So it's C17 when you have the HN20 bundle,
Yeah.
which I hope you do.
Yes, I have.
So, Mr. Morris, this is a report about 2 meetings of the London Workers' Group, and can we focus in on paragraph 3, please? About a quarter or a third of the way into that paragraph, do you see more business was done at the second meeting?
Yes.
Yep. When Tony Williams, that's HN20, was elected publicity manager with full responsibility for all advertising. The report uses the word elected. Were there formal elections for roles such as that within the group?
No, it wouldn't have been a formal election. It would have best been, we need somebody to be this person, anybody up for it? And I would have expected he would have volunteered.
Can you, with what confidence can you say he would have volunteered as opposed to someone tapping him on the shoulder and saying, we want you to do this, for example?
I think it's more likely that he volunteered. But it's possible that, it's like it's a small group, 10 people in a room. We need a publicity, but someone to be, I don't even know if it was called publicity manager, but we need somebody, to be responsible for making sure leaflets are distributed or mail-outs are going out. Someone could have said, Tony, what about you,
So
But he might have volunteered, or he may have been,
asked.
got the short straw. Yeah.
And so what you've said about the sorts of things that role would have involved, mail-outs, going out, that sort of thing. Anything more to it than that?
Publicity manager. I think probably it's about ensuring that leaflets were produced for our public meetings, which were every month, and also making sure that there was publicity in Time Out and other publications. Freedom, for example, were carrying details about our meetings.
So advertising the meetings.
Yes, I think so.
And in terms of the leaflets, would he have been authoring the leaflets?
I think that
role?
rotated. I mean, people, we've got to, what should we have a meeting on next time? Someone would suggest something, and then that person or somebody else would volunteer to do a flyer.
Can we just have a look a little bit further down that paragraph, just changing topic momentarily? There's a privacy redaction, but somebody said that the private meetings could be held at his shop, but added that he did not want anyone who was not trusted to know of this arrangement. To make his point, he explained that both he and another had been followed from a public meeting of the LWG a few weeks ago, and in consequence he wanted to avoid the attention of the security service, etc. Could I just ask you, using that as an example, was there a level of concern amongst the group that the security services or the police, for example, Special Branch, might be interested in the group's activities?
No, I don't recall this at all, but it may be because it's linked to Rising Free, and I think that the Rising Free collective were concerned about the security services. I don't know why, because I wasn't part of the Rising Free collective, but
As far as LWG,
so maybe that's because I can see that it mentions Rising Free, which is the bookshop. But apart from that, I can't really, enlighten you on this.
Okay, thank you. Can we take that down, please, and put up in its place UCPI 013069? So for your reference, that is B7 back in Mr. Morris's bundle. Mr. Morris, this is a report dated the 9th of January of 1979, reporting on an anarcho-syndicalist conference that had taken place at Conway Hall. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we go, please, to paragraph 4, the report turns to the start on Saturday morning. You had set yourself the task of recording the minutes, and then about a third of the way up from the bottom, the first to speak on this topic, which
Disputes
is the topic
in which they had been involved, yes.
People to relate details of any disputes in which they've been involved. The first to speak was Tony Williams, who said that the LWG had become involved in the current strike at Garner's Steakhouse. Do you recall him being involved in the dispute, the Garner's Steakhouse dispute, in any way?
I don't recall him being specifically involved with the Garners, but I'm sure he was, because he did speak about it at this national conference. But I don't recall how he was involved. Presumably, just joining the picket lines.
So that's the sort of thing that members of LWG might have done in support of the strike, join the picket lines.
That's what I recall we did do.
Can we go down, please, in this report to paragraph 6? We're coming back to a theme that I asked you about earlier, Mr. Morris, in this paragraph. Discussions about direct action, again, reported. And it says this: Dave Morris said that it was important that people broke down their personal inhibitions and suggested that this could be done by shoplifting, riding on buses without paying the fare, breaking windows, etc. Do you recall saying that? And if you don't, is it the sort of thing you might have said?
I don't recall saying that. I'm not sure if I was encouraging people to break down their personal inhibitions, that those were the three things I would focus on. And riding buses without paying the fare may be a reference to the campaigns that were going on to try to reduce fares in London transport. There were some major ones in the 70s and indeed in the 80s, which encouraged people to give IOU slips as a sort of to put pressure on London transport to reduce the fares. As for the breaking windows, I can't recall ever saying something like that. So, yes.
Just to complete this off, we see the decision from the words "in the end." in the end, it was decided that the LWG would produce a series of stickers for circulation to other anarcho-syndicalist groups. So following the discussion about direct action, the decision appears to have been creating some stickers for circulation.
I was very keen on stickers, I have to say, in a number of groups that I took part in. They've kind of fallen out of fashion now, and I'm not 100% sure about where they get put. But yes, that's what it boiled down to. I think that not just with garners, I think we did some stickers about rail disputes because we had rail workers in the group, and we may have done some general stickers about workplace, encouraging people to organise and to stand up for themselves in workplaces. So yes.
And just so that we're understanding correctly, by stickers, do you literally mean something with some adhesive on that you might stick, say, to a road sign, to the pole of a road sign, or traffic lights or something like that? Focus back, please, to what HN20 was doing in the group. Can we look at UCPI 013474? So this is back in your HN20 bundle at C65. A report from the 10th of October 1979.
Can I just say, just before we leave the last one, don't bring it back, but on screen, but there were a series of national conferences which London Workers Group were enthusiastically taking part in, with groups from all over the country, trying to create some kind of national network or national organisation, and in the end it didn't quite go the way that we wanted, so we kind of ploughed our own furrow in the end. But we always maintained good relations with other groups around the country where possible who were supporting workers.
So like-minded groups around the country. I want to focus straight in, please, on paragraph 3 of this report of the 10th of October 1979, which states that Tony Williams has recently been elected as treasurer of the LWG. Again, I asked you this in relation to the previous role, but in relation to the role of treasurer, was there any sort of formal election, or was it more informal?
I wouldn't have thought there would have been a vote or, formalities. I think that someone probably said, we needed you treasurer, anybody want to do it? And if everybody, was looking down at the floor and hoping not to be chosen, someone might have said, Tony, what about you? Or it's possible that he volunteered.
All right, so similar to the previous, the publicity manager role, as it was called. So this is October 1979, and he becomes the treasurer of the organisation. Can you remember either the treasurer role or the publicity manager role? Can you actually remember what Tony Williams was doing in those roles?
I can't remember his particular part, being in that role, but obviously the treasurer would have been someone who would be responsible for ensuring that money collected was put in the bank, and there were updates if the group wanted on how much money we had in the bank, which I can tell you wasn't very much.
Okay, so a sort of a traditional sort of treasurer role, responsible for the group's
Yes, he would have
finances.
probably had to have been a bank signatory and things like that, yes.
Can we zoom back out on that report, please, and just scroll, to paragraph 4. Zoom into paragraph 4. So it says there that at a meeting held on the 1st of October, so that's just before, I think, Tony Williams is being elected treasurer, members were informed the group's total assets amounted to £60, and it was decided to donate £10 of this sum to persons unknown. So is that typical of the sort of financial transaction or financial affairs that the treasurer would have been involved with?
Yes.
Reporting back to the group.
Yes.
Would the treasurer have been the person making the decision to donate a sum to another group, or would that have been a collective decision?
No, that would have been a collective decision. And obviously we needed to pay for the room hire and also the printing of leaflets and bulletins. I don't think there were many other kind of, expenses.
So that's his role. He becomes the treasurer. Can we take that report down now, please, and replace it with UCPI 013597. So this is C69, still in the HN20 bundle. 013597.
Can I just say about the treasurer role is obviously if people are making donations by cheque, which is what would have happened in those days, then he would have access to the bank details of anybody making a donation to the group by cheque.
Yes, so he gets access to the...
So it really is a gross breach of trust, being the treasurer in particular, and also the secretary, which of course gave him access to the full contacts list. Yes.
Yeah, we'll come on to that right now. So this report I've just brought up, this is the 19th of November of 1979. So in fact, it's just about a month after the report where he becomes the treasurer. This report telling us that he becomes the secretary. So if we look at paragraph 4 of this report, please, if we can zoom in. We see that somebody resigned as the secretary to the London Workers' Group in order to devote more of his time to determine his political ideas. To quote from the report, it was agreed that Tony Williams would take over the position of secretary and then his post of treasurer is filled by somebody else. So within just over a month, he moves from treasurer to secretary. When it says it was agreed, does that suggest a collective decision to you from the group,
yes,
rather than any sort of election or volunteering?
Correct. Well, he might have volunteered, but it would still have to be agreed. If somebody volunteered, okay, we all agree. So it is a position of trust, because obviously the point of having a treasurer and a secretary is not just to manage the information, but also to look after that information and keep it secure.
So you've mentioned the mailing list already today, for example. That's something that he would have had access to as the secretary of the group.
Correct.
Would he have had access to the mailing list without being secretary to the group?
I don't think I've actually seen that mailing list until it appeared in the document. So I don't think it was something that would be, circulated within a meeting or whatever. It was something that was kept by the secretary, as far as I recall.
And can we take that report down, please, and bring up UCPI 014228. 014228. So this is back in your bundle for Mr. Morris at tab B50. Sorry, forgive me a moment, I just don't have a paragraph reference. Can we scroll down? Sorry, I just want to look for a particular... Well, I don't want to take up too much time, Mr. Morris. I don't have a paragraph reference, but would you agree it's in this report is suggested that the secretary of the group would, their signature would be required for making withdrawals from the LWG bank account?
Paragraph 8.
Thank you, I'm grateful.
Well, that's what it says in paragraph. I can't really remember, but it says that we had a bank account under control of the treasurer.
Yeah,
so
and 2 signatures required.
Okay.
Yeah, including the secretary, Tony Williams. So as secretary, he would also have had some control over the operation of the bank account of the group.
It looks like it, yes. If he was a signatory, yes.
Thank you. And then finally, can we have up on the screen, please, UCPI 017143. 017143. This is B65, sir, in your bundle. This is a report now in January of 1982, Mr. Morris. And if we can scroll down, please. Keep going. Paragraph 6. We see that along with another, Tony Williams is described as coordinating the design and production of the LWG bulletin. Do you recall him taking on that role?
I don't actually recall that, but I'm sure it's true. Because it may have been, it probably was a role that was rotated. I remember somebody else managing the bulletin when we started, but I can't remember who kind of coordinated at different times, but it looks like he took it over for a certain period.
Right, but that's a role that would have rotated rather than going specifically to him?
Rotated in terms of maybe for a year. He might have done it for a year or something.
All right,
Or it may have been a couple of issues, because it was every 2 or 3 months or 3 or 4 months that we did a bulletin. They were quite long bulletins, about 20 odd pages. So it was quite a responsibility to making sure everybody did their articles and it was pulled together and turned into a bulletin. And I think we did about 500 copies of each bulletin.
In that role, would he have had any editorial sort of decision making, as in what went into the bulletin or what didn't go into it, or was it more of simply coordinating people and getting it all together?
Not much editorial control. He might have had a bit. I don't know is the answer to that question. Generally, it was collating what other people had written, which probably was discussed by the whole group. But he might have had some editorial control if he felt something needed edited because it was too long or repetitive or something. So,
can I ask you this about your recollections of HN20, such as they were? How frequently would he have attended private events in people's private homes?
We didn't have many of those. But I know that he attended an event that was earlier on screen, the Joe Hill. Was that in someone's house? No, it was the Joe Thomas, one of our members, who was elderly at that time. We had an event to celebrate his birthday.
His 70th birthday party.
70th birthday
So I think if we
party.
bring up, please, UCPI 018353. A report of the 22nd of June of 1982, so that's B74 in your bundle. Yeah, I think we see a belated 70th birthday party for Joe Thomas, a member of the London Workers Group, at someone's home. Only members of LWG were invited. And so it looks from that report as though Tony Williams was amongst those who attended the birthday party.
Yes, Joe Thomas was a founding member of the London Workers Group. He was a print worker. And I think Tony Williams in his statement says that it was essential to attend events like that, otherwise people wouldn't accept him as a trusted member of the group. And I drew the conclusion in my witness statement that all of the undercover officers, inevitably in that role, they would tend to socialise and go to people's homes, and that's part of the problem with this kind of undercover policing, is that it was inevitable they would end up socialising and going into people's homes and developing long-term relationships with people.
Finally, just on HN20 and the London Workers Group generally, he admits in his witness statement to having been involved in fly posting. but he says he didn't participate in any other criminal activity nor encourage or provoke any. Do you agree with that, based on your recollection of Tony Williams, that he wasn't involved in anything more serious than fly posting, and that he didn't encourage or provoke any other sort of criminality?
I don't recall him encouraging any serious criminal activity.
Any criminal activity, I should have said, so it's my fault.
Or any criminal activity. Well, I mean, fly posting, that's, you know, everyone considers that as bog standard normal activity of any kind of group, especially at that time before the internet. To get your message over, you had to do leaflets and posters. So he does say in his witness statement, paragraphs 138 and 139, it might be worth getting up.
So MPS 075971. So what paragraphs did you want?
138 and 139 on page 48.
40, I think it's 49 on the system.
Is it?
Yes,
Okay.
it's got the bottom right pagination that you may not have.
Okay, it's different, yes.
Slightly different. So MPS 07...
I haven't got anything coming up on my screen at all, actually.
No, 0745971, page 49. So this is about Torness, which I will come to shortly, but yes.
Yes, so he says in 138, I witnessed public disorder at Torness, which you'll come to. I have no real recollection of witnessing public disorder whilst in London, because Torness was in Scotland. Yes. So I think that's a significant admission that after 4 years infiltrating the anarchist movement, he didn't witness any public disorder. And then he goes on 139, paragraph 139, I did not witness nor become involved in violence whilst deployed undercover, save that the police in Scotland in Torness were somewhat heavy-handed in dealing with what was essentially non-aggressive trespass. So I concluded in my witness statement that the only violence he could recall is basically from the police.
And in terms of his own behaviour then, which is just coming back to that to be clear, you don't recall him encouraging people to become involved in crimes and things like that himself?
No.
Can we just got a few questions for you about Torness in 1980, which is when...
Can I just say one thing about Tony Williams before we leave him, that when we found out that London Workers' Group had been infiltrated, 2 or 3 of us tried to work out who that might be. Actually, we suspected somebody else. This was say 5 years ago. And this is part of the problem of not releasing the cover names of all the undercover officers. Because once we know that a group has been infiltrated, everybody's going to say, well, who was it? And without releasing the cover names, that really is disruptive and potentially, traumatic, for people looking back over their lives and as involved in a campaign group. So I think it's really important that all the cover names are released. Not just for the sake of us in this room or who are giving evidence, but for people involved with those groups who are going to suspect other people. That's one of the reasons that this kind of infiltration is really out of order, because once it comes out, it just creates this kind of division and trauma and confusion.
I'm sure your point has been heard, Mr. Morris.
But I'm glad to say that we did identify. I did think it was Tony Williams, and I sent a photograph to the inquiry about 3 or 4 years ago. And
yes, can we put that on the screen? UCPI 036743. Before it goes up, I should just say, so as you're aware, this is subject to a reporting restriction, so it will go up in the room, but it will not go up on the feed to the outside world.
Correct.
That's the photograph I think you provided, isn't it, Mr. Morris?
Yes, and the other people in the photograph were removed from it by the inquiry. Yes, this is at Torness in Scotland, and basically there was a camping event over a May Day weekend, and the idea was to have a public sort of mini festival. It was only 200 or 300 people, but all the public in the area were invited to it was the site of the construction of a nuclear power station. There was a big movement across the whole of the UK, in fact all around the world, against the building of new nuclear power stations. And obviously I don't want to go on at length, but basically the issue was that they are a dangerous, extremely dangerous technology. The waste has to be stored safely for tens of thousands of years, which is basically not possible to ensure. And there's always a risk of an accident. There had been an accident in 3 Mile Island in the USA, which was close to catastrophe, but it was averted. And then there was an accident at Chernobyl in Eastern Europe, which resulted in estimated 9,000 to 16,000 deaths as a result of radioactivity.
So the camp that you're
So that's why we were
was-
protesting against the construction of this new nuclear power station in Scotland. And yes, and there was a festival, like sort of mini, not festival, but a mini kind of festival, camping with engaging the public and displays. And my contribution was I'd created this kind of display of a map of Britain and with sightings of all the different nuclear power stations, and people were given darts and they were invited to throw them at the map, see if you can hit a nuclear power station, and this is what would happen if there was a nuclear strike. I think it also had military bases where there were cruise missiles sighted, and if there had been a nuclear war and missiles were fired at Britain, you could just see the damage it would do, because they were all sighted. Britain is a small place, so if there's an accident at a nuclear power station, or there's a cruise missile from the Soviet Union, as it was at the time, aimed at Britain, it would result in hundreds of thousands of deaths.
All right. So the Torness was a focus of an anti-nuclear.
Because it was being constructed, it was a big focus for the whole anti-nuclear movement. And this was the first time I had started to meet people from London Greenpeace, who I later got involved with, because they were very prominent in protests against nuclear weapons and nuclear energy.
Okay, we'll come back to London Greenpeace in the next phase of the inquiry. I just want to ask you to focus for now on HN20 Tony Williams and his attendance at Torness in May 1980. He recalls in his witness statement attending with members or colleagues, as he calls them, from the London Workers' Group. I think you were there yourself, is that right, in 1980?
Yes.
Right. And that's where we get this photograph from?
Yes.
Right. Can we take the photograph down, please? And can we replace it with a report written by HN20 on the event, UCPI 014018. It's a report dated the 4th of June of 1980, and sir, it is your B48. Paragraph 2 of the report, Mr. Morris, it describes it as the annual demonstration at the construction site, and then it says the weekend had been planned by groups, many of which were anarchists, committed to direct action and to causing criminal damage. Do you agree with that description of the plan for the weekend?
So this weekend had been organised openly at a series of national meetings. The year before, 10,000 people had taken part in a festival at the site. and 3,000 people had occupied the site through the fences of the construction site. And I think the aim was to, build on that by having activities focused on that weekend, which included the camping festival, mini festival, and some protests at the entrances. And some people, I don't actually know I don't know if there was a whole agreed set of plans, but that individual groups had different ideas. I think some people went into the local village and engaged with local residents or whatever. So I wouldn't say that there was a plan which everybody knew what everybody else was going to do.
Okay, understood. So this report...
But I went with the idea of taking this display for the mini festival, but I was expecting to do a sit down at an entrance.
Okay, so as in a group of people sitting down, literally sitting down,
which is what happened
on the ground.
And I got arrested.
Right. Can I just ask you, sticking with this report for a moment, it says further down this paragraph, it refers to the Ecology and Anarchism Collective, as it says there, and it says plans had previously been formulated by that collective to cut the perimeter fence of the construction site during the night of the 1st to the 2nd of May in preparation for further actions. But the plans were abandoned when the strength of the police in attendance was appreciated. Were you aware in advance of plans to cut through the fence at all?
I remember that some people wanted to cut the fence. I didn't remember exactly that this was that particular group, which I was part of for some time. I wasn't part of through its whole history of that group, but yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
All right. And if we move down then, that plan appears to have been called off because of the police attendance. Paragraph 3 describes, in the event, a meeting on Friday the 2nd of May at about 10 p.m. at the campsite of all those present. And at the meeting, a decision was taken by the majority of groups to attack the construction site during the night, approaching the wire fence from the beach. The E&A collective decided that advantage should be taken of the likely diversion created by other groups to attack at a different point, and in the event several holes were cut in the outer fence, but the inner wire was not penetrated and no one succeeded in entering the site. Were you party to those plans?
So I wouldn't say attack the site is a good description. I can't really remember, to be honest, but I'm sure the idea was to try to enter the site and occupy it, basically.
Tony Williams, do you remember if he played any part in sort of
I
planning or
don't
signing up to
recall,
that?
but I know he's mentioned it in his statement, but I can't add anything further. I don't know if you're going to ask me, but I took part in a sit-down protest at the front entrance. There must have been about 40 or 50 people. And I believe there were a number of entrances, so it was largely symbolic. And at one point, the police just decided to arrest everybody. I remember a senior officer walking. I was in the middle of a big scrum of 40 or 50 people. I remember a senior police officer coming right up to me, pointing at me and saying to other officers, "Arrest him." Yeah, not for anything that I was doing, but obviously they had decided that I should be arrested beforehand, that I was to be singled out. And I remember, well, I've said in my witness statement that a police officer tried to grab my glasses, which I thought was very provocative, but I just shouted out, he's grabbing my glasses, he's grabbing my glasses. Then he stopped doing it, which is good. But there were 27 of us, I think, were arrested and we were taken to Edinburgh Police Station.
But no further action, I think, is that right?
Some people were
you?
charged and fined later. I wasn't charged. charged. They have a different system in Scotland. I'm not quite sure how it works, but
Right. I'm just going to move things along, so I'm conscious that we're running a bit
Yes.
short of time, Mr. Morris. I want to ask you a few questions. Not at all. I want to ask you a few questions about the Persons Unknown campaign. So HN20's reporting records you at various meetings of the campaign. And we can bring it up if you want, but he describes you in his witness statement. He says you appeared to be a keen member of the Persons Unknown campaign. Do you agree with that description?
Yes, I think I was involved. It was a basically fairly traditional defence campaign for people that were arrested. There were serious charges. So we did all the things that a defence campaign would be expected to do, which is, encourage people to write to the prisoners when they were being held on remand, publicise the case, liaise between the solicitors and the defendants and the supporters so that people knew what was going on. Be linked up with other groups that were campaigning against certain repressive laws that were implicated in this particular case. And there was a lot of hysteria in the media about what these people were allegedly planning to do, which all melted away. The charges were dropped to fairly much more lower level charges. And eventually the Persons Unknown defendants who had the collective trial were all found not guilty. So we feel, looking back, that it was a successful campaign. And I personally was involved with a number of different defence campaigns over the years. I always felt it was important to support people that were facing, arrested, or even if they went to prison, so that they weren't isolated. Doesn't mean to say that I necessarily agreed with what they were charged with or what they may or may not have done, but it was important that they didn't get isolated.
You've answered what was going to be my next question. I won't bring the part of the statement up, but HN20 says in his statement, it's paragraph 92, that the fact of support for these alleged conspirators to commit explosions tended to suggest the support for the use of the violence. You're saying you weren't a supporter of that.
No.
You were a supporter of them as prisoners. Do you agree that supporting their cause might denote some sympathy with their actions potentially, or not at all?
No, I don't support explosions and bombs. And, the biggest culprit is the government. They have loads of bombs and they're prepared to use them.
To what extent did the campaign, your involvement in the campaign, from what you observed, to what extent did it involve you receiving updates and things from the solicitors or the other lawyers that were representing the defendants in the trial?
Yes, I think when you have a defence campaign, you do get briefed, both by lawyers if they are attending a meeting, but also by defendants if they attend a meeting. And sometimes that briefing can reveal legally privileged material. But, that's all a bit beyond my, skill set.
Yeah,
but
just focusing
we would have had briefing on legal tactics and advice that had been given.
Can I turn, please, to another group now, the Revolutionary Prisoners Group? Can we bring up UCPI 021274? 021274, so it's your B23. And can we just vote, thank you. It's a report of the 23rd of May 1979, Mr. Morris, on the inaugural meeting of the newly formed Revolutionary Prisoners Group taking place at the Rising Free Bookshop. And you are listed as attending, and we take it from this report that so was HN20 in attendance. Can we zoom in, please, on paragraph 3, which describes the group? it says it believes in supporting prisoners who resist authority.
Yes.
A bit further down, the RPG catered for those who wanted the whole prison system to be smashed, in quotation marks. Do you agree with that description of
So
the group?
I wasn't involved with setting up this group, and actually I'd completely forgotten about it. I don't even know if I actually do remember it, but I've read these reports. So I don't think I was that much involved with it.
Can you describe
but
how you came to be at the inaugural meeting?
I probably, it may have been a proposal to set up a group. I did support prisoners in different ways. I visited prisoners, including in other countries. And I do feel strongly that they shouldn't be isolated. And I think actually I have thought about this, that this group, throughout the 1970s, there were some quite substantial prisoners' struggles and campaigns. There was an attempt to set up a prisoners' union throughout the whole of the 1970s. At one time, they had a prisoners' strike involving 10,000 prisoners. So there was a quite big effort, and that kind of fizzled out. There was occupations of prisons by the prisoners, like rooftop protests. And in 1976, Hull prison was occupied by the prisoners. And when that finished, that was 4 days, when that was finished, all those involved with that occupation, which was hundreds of prisoners, were viciously beaten up by the prison officers, and 12 prison officers were found guilty of assault. And that was, I think, 1978, with those trials of those prison officers. So that's a context of why people might have wanted to set up a prisoners group that was, not just trying to reform prisoners or support prisoners in terms of their welfare, but actually against prisons. So I would have gone along, but I don't think I got heavily involved, although I know that I mentioned in another one of the reports.
All right. We'll come to one of the reports. Can I just ask you before we leave this one about paragraph 4, which provides a description of how the group was to be organised. It says at that meeting it became clear that the RPG intended to operate on 2 levels. Firstly, as a propaganda machine fighting for people such as Phil Ruff, and secondly, as an underground group split into cells in order to commit minor illegal acts such as painting messages on walls and in railway stations and breaking windows, etc., of any business or public office which the group considered to be a worthwhile target.
I have no recollection of that at all. But, I can believe that it's possible that that's what people are discussing. I'm not sure what they mean by split into cells.
All right. The of the group, again, I won't bring it up unless you want me to, but HN20 says in his witness statement at paragraph 114 that generally there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action in this group.
In this group?
Yes, of this group.
As
Again,
I say,
are you
I
able
really
to-
can't remember. I'm sure that there was a lot of talk and less action, yes.
Can we have a look, please, just before I move on, at one report? So UCPI 021058. It's the 12th of July 1979. So it's your B33. And it's a meeting of the Revolutionary Prisoners Group. 7 persons are said to have attended. You are one of them, and so presumably was HN20 there, so that leaves only 5 others. Is that, to the best of your recollection, the sort of size of the group, or you simply can't remember?
I can't remember this group at all. Yeah.
Okay. if we move fairly quickly through this, then there is discussion at this group of action, and at paragraph 5, we see Tony Williams was asked if he would reconnoitre the W12 area to ascertain the position of post boxes. The discussion had been of gluing up post boxes as an action.
As you can see here, that this was an issue about one of the demands of the prisoners' union and also the whole prison dispute or occupation was about prisoners being used as slave labour, not being paid for the work they do in prison. And one of the things that prisoners were doing was making mailbags for the post office. So I think here the idea was to somehow get publicity about the fact that the post office is using not just cheap labour but free labour for its mailbags. And I think that's probably, although I don't recall this conversation, that's probably why mailboxes were being talked about gluing up, which, as far as I understand, gluing up the lock isn't actually damaging the mailboxes because they would be unglued by some kind of solvent or whatever, but it would get publicity.
Actually, I think there's
Which it
mention
did,
of a
which
leaflet.
apparently, when you read further on, it didn't get any publicity, and people felt, therefore, it wasn't a success. So really, it was about getting publicity for the link between Wormwood Scrubs prison and the local post office.
Can you assist us as to whether or not HN20, it says he agreed to carry out the reconnoitre of the area. Do you recall whether he did go ahead with that, whether he
No
took any
idea.
part in the action at all? One more report, please, about the RPG, UCPI 021122. 021122. So it is, it should be, oh, I'm sorry, it's in your HN20 bundle, this report. And it's C57.
Can I just say about Tony Williams, you know, I don't remember him that much. I remember him being around. I certainly don't remember him being an agent provocateur trying to stir up, activities that he could then report on. He did have a van. He used to drive people to different events and activities. So, maybe he felt that was the influence. And obviously became treasurer and secretary and other things. So he was very influential, but I don't remember him, to be fair, being an agent provocateur.
Thank you. All right. Can we just have a look? It may feed into what you've just said in this report. It's a report on a meeting of the RPG again. And can we have a look at paragraph 3 in particular, please? There is some discussion there about a possible way of attacking the German food centre by throwing smoke bombs into the premises whilst they were open. And the report records that Tony Williams, along with another, were completely against the gesture. They said there were already too many people who knew of the existence of the group and its activities should be kept on a low key. And this was agreed. Is that typical of the sort of contribution that you would expect him to have made?
Well, I don't recall this at all, but I can't recall him ever supporting such, throwing a smoke bomb. And I doubt if I would have supported it either. And as far as I can see, it didn't happen. So.
So I've failed miserably to keep my questioning within the time allotted to me because I've yet to ask Mr. Morris about HN85, Roger Pierce.
Yes. Roughly how long do you have left?
I would imagine no less than 20 minutes,
Yes.
even if I cut it a little bit. Because Mr. Morris hadn't seen all of the documents at the time he gave his witness statement, so he hasn't had a chance to speak to them.
Right. Well, then I think we better all have a break of an hour, and so we should be ready to start at or very shortly before 2.
Yes.
We can say 5 to 2. That will, I think, be helpful.
Yes.
Mr. Morris, you able to come back then?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we'll break until 5 to 2. Could I ask that anyone who has any questions arising out of what has already been given, could they be communicated to Ms. Gargester over the break, please? It will then enable us to catch up a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.